Welcome everybody to this evening's webinar. We have CFI Joe and Andrew here to present for us. If you have any ideas for future webinars, always let us know. We know the weather hasn't been great lately, but hopefully it will get better and this will be a fun way to be inspired for your next flight. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Joe and Andrew.
All right, thanks, Gabby. Thank you, Gabby. Welcome back, everybody. So tonight we're going to be talking about the New York Hudson and Washington, D.C. SFRA areas.
So we'll go ahead and dive right in. As you can see, New York is the top one, and D.C. is going to be the bottom one. So we'll go a little bit more in depth.
Okay, so I'm Joe. I've been a CFI here at Princeton since February of last year. Andrew?
All right, and my name is Andrew. I've been a flight instructor here since July of 2023, and yeah.
All right, so let's dive into it.
All right.
Starting with, what is a SFRA? Right? Special Flight Rules Area.
It's just another acronym we got to memorize.
Yeah. So it's a special use airspace. Most SFRAs are going to require special training. You can get so on the FAA website, FAAsafety.gov. We have the links down there as well. And if you forget those or you don't have them, just Google it. They'll pop right up. It's not hard to find.
And it's not like you have to pay anything for them.
And we just want to stress that this webinar is not a replacement for taking those safety courses. You do have to get those done if you want to fly in DC or the Hudson.
Yep. So you got to go online. They'll give you a little certificate, take class. They may have a few questions for you. Just go on, fill that out. I forget which website. Well, they have it on here. I know the FAA has like multiple different websites for like IACRA testing, but if you ever get lost, you can just come down to the YouTube video whenever it's posted, and you can click on one of these links right on here if you go into the PowerPoint.
Yeah. All right. So there's more than just the DC SFRA and the Washington SFRA. There's a couple other examples. We're not going to get into depth with any of these tonight. There's one for the Grand Canyon, as you can see on the right. Got this nice little blue line with the blue blocks around it. Then we have one at Los Angeles Airport, LAX. It's a whole another beast.
That's on the other side.
And then there is one in Florida as well for Fort
Walton Beach.
Yeah, that area. So
there's just a few other ones to be aware about, right? But tonight we'll mainly focus on the DC and also the New York, because those are probably going to be what we're going to be flying around here, right?
Right.
DC is only an hour. Well, DC is a little bit further, but New York's only about an hour flight. It's easy, nice flight to do with friends. So we want to make sure if you're going to do these flights, you're prepared, you know what classes you need to take, and you can do it safely.
Right. And as we were talking about before, there's also a few things that we kind of looked at in depth a little more with this.
Yep.
That they don't talk about on the safety webinars.
Exactly. On the actual FAA stuff, because some stuff is constantly updated, which we'll show you a little bit later.
Okay. So we're going to get right into it with the Hudson River exclusion first. So it starts at the Verrazano Bridge and ends at the Alpine Tower. If you were looking to study the bars, the regulations surrounding that, you could look in Part 93, 350 through 353, subpart W. I know you're all dying to look into it. And it goes from the surface to 1,300 sea level. And I have it highlighted in that nice little picture in the green.
As you can see right below, goes from 1,300, also 1,300 up here.
Correct. So if you're going to be flying the Hudson, the first step is always going to be plan appropriately on the ground before you even go fly it. So there is a lot of Class B airspace over top of it that you have to be aware of. And you can see we have a couple of those shelves circled. It drops from 3,000 to 1,500. And even more in the inner rings, you can see it's going to 800, 500. So you want to plan appropriately to navigate underneath of those shelves.
Because if you're planning on flying, I'm gonna do 2,900 or maybe 1,400 here. Now you only have what, 100-foot buffer maybe, and if that wind picks you up, well, you could be going right into the Bravo. So maybe a good idea to give yourself a little buffer room. But then you also got to be aware, how high is the Verrazano Bridge? what obstacles are in the way, right? You still have to see and avoid all these obstacles. And also, if you come out too far, are you still within gliding distance of the shore?
Right.
Because if I say, oh, I'm going to come out here and then come down, well, are we within gliding distance if we're only at 1,000 feet?
Right.
Some other concerns about. So it's not just the airspace.
Right. And also tying back into that airspace notion, there's also, you want to make sure you're not violating any TFRs or NOTAMs while you're flying this. You want to do it safely and legally, avoid obstacles. And keep in mind that this is a VFR corridor. It's visual flight. So see and avoid and right of way rules as a part 91-113 still do apply. As well as the weather minimums for VFR flight. So 91-115. So you also might want to think you're going to be flying at low altitudes. Do you really want to go on a day that's super windy? Or if you have 4 miles of visibility, it's still technically VFR, but you're going to be flying close to buildings at a low altitude.
Yes.
So you might want to think ahead of that a little bit and try to plan for not just a legal day, but a fun day that you'll enjoy.
Yeah, even though it's legal, right? Are we able to complete this flight safely? That's the main thing. You always want to be safe, err on the side of caution. Never think, oh, well, I got people who want to go and I'm just going to go, even though it's gusting 40 knots out, right? That probably wouldn't be a good day. So never feel rushed or never feel like you have to go.
Right. And on top of that, try to think ahead of the airplane a little bit, get your frequencies together before you go in the plane. I see people, we've all done it at least once where we're kind of stumbling around with frequencies, trying to get it in while we're flying the plane. Get it ahead of time. We have them here listed on the webinar. There's also a nice me board thing that they give you at the end of the Hudson course. But all right, so let's talk about the type of operations you can do in the Hudson. They define them as transient operations. So if you're trying to go from point A to B, like if you're trying to go to a different airport, this would be considered a transient operation. You're just trying to use it to pretty much cut through the Bravo at a low altitude.
Get to the other side.
Right. So for transient operations, you would want to stay roughly 1,000 MSL to 1,299 MSL. Once you're 1,300, you're going into the
you'd be in the Bravo at that point.
You're going to be getting a number.
And if you're VFR, you better have that Bravo clearance.
Right. So for local operations, which would be your sightseeing, law enforcement, news gathering, you would want to desurface to 999 MSL.
Okay. Yep. And you can see all the examples, right? What they list here.
All right. So as far as flying the actual Hudson, you're going to want to stay on the east side if you're traveling south to north, and the west side if you're traveling north to south. So stay on the right.
Just like you would when you're driving on the road, right?
Right. You want to maintain the appropriate altitudes that we just discussed. You want to try to maintain an airspeed of less than 140 knots indicated. I know it's hard in those sky halls.
The speed, get that good tailwind. Well, no, indicator, you're still good.
We're going to self-announce your position. We have the reporting points and the calls coming up in just a couple of slides. You want to have your landing lights on, position lights, be nice and visible for other traffic.
Especially if you're doing this at nighttime, right? Because there's a lot of city lights and it'd be more difficult to see you, even with your lights on too. So you want to make yourself the most visible as possible because you're within close proximity to buildings, the planes. Depends how many people are doing it, if it's busy or not.
Right. And you should have a terminal area chart handy.
And ForeFlight actually has those terminal area charts.
Right.
They're in the FAA section, I believe, of there. You gotta go searching a little bit for it if you don't know where to find it.
And if you put on settings, bring chart to front, you could switch by just having on the screen the ForeFlight as well.
Yep. And I'll pull it right up on the sectional.
Yeah. It's never a bad idea to have a paper backup though.
Yeah. It's always good to have a paper because then you can lay it out. It's not as big as a section was right there.
Right. All right. So within the course, the FAA course, they do list the important frequencies that you need for operating the Hudson. So for the East River, LaGuardia, and Newark, they list the frequencies that you would need here. So on top of those frequencies, I think it's also important to have your weather frequencies handy. You want to be on the correct altimeter setting for the area, especially plane hasn't flown in a while. You get a bunch of pressure changes. Now you're
Could be
400 feet off.
And ATC is saying you're in the Bravo, but you're saying my altimeter is still saying I'm out of the Bravo.
Right. And they're not going to see that as an excuse.
Yeah,
they're going to see it as a violation.
Exactly.
So don't get yelled at by a little body or something.
All that checklist.
Right. And also, I think it's nice to have an idea of what's coming ahead before you even take off, pick up the weather and say, okay, it's gusting 40 there, but it's calm here. Maybe,
may not be may not be the best day, or go fly somewhere else.
Right. Right. So if you're flying the Hudson River, you're going to self-announce on a familiar frequency.
Princeton's lighting frequency. So when you actually turn on the lights sometimes we step over people who are actually in New York trying to self-announce.
So when you self-announce on 123.05, you're going to include the type of aircraft, where you are, how high up you are, and which way you're headed. To the right, you can see that example. So you just tell them, I usually would include a little more specific than just Cessna. I would usually just say Skyhawk or 172. The point that you're at. So in this case, that's the George Washington Bridge, your altitude, and which direction you're going. So Cessna Skyhawk, Intrepid, 900 feet southbound.
Gives everyone an idea. It's just like our common CTAP, right?
Right.
It's just like a radio where we're just talking pilot to pilot. All right, I'm here, you're there. Making sure you're aware of all the radio calls. I know it's a nice sightseeing route to go on, but you got to remember too, we also still have to make sure that we're making these calls, because if we're not, we could be coming close to other aircraft. So it's very important to self-announce and be listening all the time for other aircraft around you. If I say this and I'm southbound, and all of a sudden a few seconds later I hear someone else's northbound, same altitude, all right, now my eyes come off the city. Where's that plane at? Because I want to find out where they're at.
Right.
And I don't want to be looking now at the city.
It's especially important when you consider how tight of a space the Hudson River is. There's a lot less reaction time that somebody else was coming towards you. So you really want to be vocal.
And don't be afraid to talk to them. Hey, where are you at? I don't see you. I'm at this point. I got to be near you somewhere.
Yeah.
Talk about it. Figure out where everyone's at. You don't want to hog up the radio too much, but you want to make sure you're able to safely know where another aircraft is at.
Cool. So these are the mandatory reporting points for the New York Hudson. We have VZ, which is the Verrazano Bridge, Statue of Liberty. You also hear a lot of people refer to her as the Lady.
Yep.
Clock Tower. If you fly it at night, especially, it looks like a big old Ferris wheel.
It's a giant circle.
Intrepid, which is just big ship.
Yep.
GWB, which is the George Washington Bridge, and then the Alpine Tower. Okay, so you want to make a call at each one of those points.
So this call right here, right? If I was at the Verrazano, I'd say Cessna at the Verrazano, 900 feet northbound.
Right.
Flying up. Or if I was somewhere else at the clock, 900 feet northbound, southbound. Just give them where you're at and the way you're going.
Right. And in the next slide, so they have these little graphics attached to this map, but go ahead. So we included some little better visual. So we've got the Verrazano in the top left. Big bridge. You can't miss it. Next, you got the Statue of Liberty. I'm sure you all know what that looks like. Then you got the Colgate clock.
They had Colgate on it until today.
Yeah.
I knew it was a big clock.
The one under the Colgate one, that's the Alpine Tower. That one's super visible too. Got George Washington Bridge. It's another bridge. Hard to miss it. And then Intrepid. Big Navy ship.
Right. And speaking of the lady, right? So we're going to go over a way, because you can actually circle around the statue, right?
Right. And that's how I got that picture with the
circling around.
Palatine.
So the thing to be aware about when you do this, so right, because if I'm coming northbound, I may have to cut across someone's path that's going southbound, right? Because we're staying on that right side. So when I go across, I want to make sure that there's no traffic coming southbound if I'm coming in northbound to go around the statue. So be aware. That's why it's important to make those radio calls, because you can just cut them off. And when you're in a tight space where if you're off a little bit, you could go into Bravo, you want to be aware of what's around you.
Right. Another big thing is helicopters. You really got to be careful about those helicopters. They're doing so many sightseeing tours, especially on a nice day. So they're usually going to be around 500 feet, but it doesn't mean they can't go higher or lower. They're helicopters. They'll do what they want. So just be vigilant, be aware, make a call, circle counterclockwise, so keep it on your left. Okay. And here we got some nice pictures that I took on one of my flights on the Hudson. It's just a beautiful flight. I gotta get people excited for flying. Right? Rather. All right. So you really do get like right up in there.
You can get right next to the city, especially when you're going northbound. You can see how close you can kind of get. And then up here would be an Intrepid. It's not in this picture, but it's a little bit further.
It's like, yeah, it's kind of in there. You got the cruise ships too. But no, it's not in there.
Nah, I thought it was for a minute.
And then some pictures of New York City at night that I took on a night flight with a friend.
And this is the important thing. So at nighttime, right, why it's important to talk. If you're looking out this radio and there's a plane right there with all their lights on, you may not be able to see them in this whole other pile of lights, right?
Right.
You got small lights in the center of a whole cluster of lights. So you want to be aware, okay, if that plane's there, try to find that flashing light because most likely the beacon light or strobe light.
Right.
Maybe your best bet on finding them or finding the dark area flying across possibly.
Right. And in theory, they should be on the other side, usually.
Yes. They should be far enough away.
Yeah. So should be good. It does feel very cramped, but at the same time, it feels very spacious. Like if you're looking at the map, it feels very cramped.
Yes. If you're looking at it.
Especially if you're looking at ForeFlight.
Exactly. How wide? Do you know how wide it is? It's only like
not offhand.
Yeah. Forget. It's not too wide, but.
It's wide enough.
Yeah. You can
for a couple seconds.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you wanted to just kind of transition through the Hudson as well, but didn't feel like staying at 999 feet or 1,000 feet, you could also request flight following and do what's called the Skyline. So you would have to obtain clearance. If you're headed north, you would get clearance from Newark Tower. We have the frequency here. Or if you were headed south, you would get a flight following from LaGuardia, 12605. It's important to know that you're going to have to request a clearance before you get to either Verrazano or Alpine Tower. So before you even start, you want to call them.
Yes.
And it is on a workload basis. So if they're really busy, they might tell you no.
Because then they can't have you flying over if they're trying to vector jets around, trying to get into all three major airports there.
Yeah.
And also another good thing to be aware about is if you're coming in, so up on the sectional here, right? If you're coming this way, right? Where's that 1,500 feet start? That starts right here. So if you're coming into a Skyline, you're saying, oh, I'll pick them up further down the river. Remember, where does this Bravo shelf start, right? So you can't be above there as you come in. So if you're flying from Princeton, right, how far out before you have to call them and start talking to them? Because it's not, oh, I get close to Verrazano. No, it may be all the way back here, depending on what altitude you're at.
Right. So just a matter of staying ahead of the airplane, not bustling any airspace.
Yep.
Being get screamed at by New York.
Exactly. Let's see.
Okay. East River, another part of the Hudson. So it's going to be located between Governor's Island and Roosevelt Island. So fixed wing aircraft do need to receive an ATC authorization before entering that airspace. You need to contact LaGuardia prior to Governor's Island, 126.05. Once again, workload basis. So most of the traffic that goes in there, the ones that don't need to get a flight following are going to be seaplanes and helicopters.
Because it's very difficult to try to make a turnaround. I mean, you can see this is even skinnier than the Hudson corridor.
Right.
So trying to make a turn in there in 172, it's going to be a very, very steep turn.
Right.
Trying to turn around.
Real tight. But even if you're talking to LaGuardia, you still want to monitor the CTAF frequency for that area on 123.05 because got helicopters and seaplanes that aren't talking with LaGuardia.
So they're VFR underneath.
Right.
So be aware of what they're doing and what their intentions are.
Okay. And at the end of the New York Hudson River course, they will give you this nice little knee board with all the information that's pertinent. So make sure you're still checking NOTAMs, check for updates. before you go fly it. Things change in aviation all the time, and you just want to stay aware and not bust any regs or put yourself into any sort of dangerous situations.
That's also a nice quick reference. Oh, where am I at? What does this look like? How far away? What's the rules? Anything you have any questions about?
Right.
Right there.
Yeah, but you should always double check the frequencies.
Yes. Always make sure because you could tune in point two off sometimes,
or one could be off out by NOTAM.
That's true. Frequency. So always remember, do your pre-flight planning, check everything, especially for TFRs.
Oh yeah, now we get into the meat and potatoes.
Washington D.C. CFRA. So as you can see, just like when we were talking about them before, you can see the CFRA is defined by the blue circle with the blacks coming out. This is the area. This one is a circle. As you can see in New York, it's a little bit different. It goes up the river. But because they have some important people in DC, right, they have to put special restrictions on airspace around here for national security.
Right. And also, there is a few times in the DC training course where they talk about the DC VOR DME. We have a picture of it on the right. So that's what you'll be looking for. It's just a big circle around the whole CFRA. So there's a little bit surrounding that with rules and regulations, not too much, but
you want to be aware.
Just want to point out what it is. All right.
So why is important? So, right, we want to get the right training because this area is heavily enforced. You fly into it and you don't realize if
you don't know what you're doing, it could end in one of three ways.
So you could have penalties. Your certificate may be taken away. You may have to do extra training. It all depends on the situation on how far you flew in and what are you doing. And
more so, also with like the prosecution, if you like knowingly violated something, like if you were like, well, I know I'm not supposed to fly over the middle, but
I'm gonna do it anyways.
Yeah, I gotta save 20 minutes.
Yeah, then it may not.
How are they gonna know?
Yeah.
Then you're gonna get prosecuted.
You may be going to court, anything like that. Or the last one, which is if you get very close, saying I'm gonna do turns around a point above the White House or anything like that. They may have deadly force if they're not talking to you, don't know what your plan is.
If you're doing it over the White House, you're probably dead already. They got
and that's when you're going to see a lot of fighter jets coming, right? Because like I said, it's national airspace. They don't want you flying over this for security reasons.
But to be clear on the deadly force part of that is an absolute last resort scenario where you're not talking to them, you're not complying with them, and
you turned the radios off and said, I'm flying this way.
Yeah, and they're just not having it. Yeah. They gave you every chance they could.
Exactly. They give you plenty of chances before, so if you're not, you're doing something seriously wrong. Right, so what is the DC CFRA? It's an area defined as 30 nautical miles from Washington, D.C. in every direction. So if you look on your sectional, measure a distance, it's 30 nautical miles, just a circle. In order to fly in it, we need special requirements needed, and we also must be talking to ATC. Another thing we'll talk about in a little bit is if you're flying in here, you also must have a discrete transponder code.
Yep, and we'll get into that a little bit.
But, right. So some of the requirements, you must obtain an advanced clearance from air traffic control into and out of the CFRA. If you're flying within it, you must have an altitude encoding transponder, right? So you can't have one that doesn't give your altitude,
right?
Because they want to be more aware of where you're at. More controlled airspace. And like I said, you must have that 4-digit numbers, that transponder code that you have to have always on. You never want to squawk 1200 when you're in the CFRA.
Right. You never squawk BF on the CFRA.
Yes. You should always be on the code.
Yeah. It goes against everything we've been learning.
The other thing is, while you're flying, you must be talking to ATC. Unless you're cleared, okay, you're landing at this airport, you can clear to the next frequency for traffic advisory, right? So we want to make sure that we're constantly talking to ATC. They want to know what you're doing.
Okay.
Right? So now, if you're operating inside of the CFRA, so the FAA has this nice chart for us. We can actually see on here how, if we're operating IFR, these are the requirements. What do I need, right? General, VFR, right? It goes right down the list of everything you need. So if you look it up on the FAA, they'll show you this chart, or you can come back to this after the YouTube video is posted. Take a look at this if you're ever flying in the CFRA. It lets you know what you need, simplifies it down a little bit.
So one thing I think we kind of skipped over was separating the CFRA from the freeze.
Yes.
Yes. So if you look at it on the right, you can see it says CFRA and then freeze, FRZ.
Flight restriction zone, which we're going to talk about in a little bit.
Right.
But so that 30 nautical miles is this ring right here.
Inside.
So for this, oh yeah, that's the 30. Sorry.
ECA.
Yes, the FRZ is this one.
Yes. So freeze is going to be where the White House is and Capitol, everything that they don't want you flying over. So it's a little bit more restricted.
So this would be that VOR DME.
Right. And like I said, there's not much coming from that.
Not.
But there is more of a speed requirement. And I think it's like right outside of the mode C veil too.
So these are, you have 3 circles pretty much.
Yeah. In assessment, you're not going to have to worry about going more than 230.
Yep.
But if you're in a multi-engine aircraft and you're cruising,
you may want to be aware if you're in an Aztec or anything, or you're getting close to that 180 knots, may be able to get up there.
Well, that's for the CFRA area, for the
I'm talking about if you're in it.
Yeah. But
all right. So one thing to be aware before we go into what you actually need with filing flight plans and everything, we have to know about certain gates around the CFRA, right? So we have Woolly, Paleo, Wino, all these different gates, and they're all defined by radials off of VORs.
Right.
As you can see, this is the flight restriction zone, and then this is the CFRA.
Right. And you can also find them on a terminal area chart.
Yep. And you can see also here, it has the certain frequencies for when you're flying. So I know, okay, if I'm flying out of this way, maybe 125.125 is the frequency I want to be on. Or if I'm flying out of east, 132.7. Good things to be aware about. This way, if you're confused, all right, what frequency should I go to? They're all right here depending on where your location is at. Right. All right. So exiting from an airport inside the CFRA. So our exit procedures, we have to file a CFRA flight plan. It's almost like a regular VFR flight plan with a few little twists to it, essentially. So what it does, you obtain a discrete squawk code before you take off. You always want to make sure you establish two-way communication. And when you actually file it, you want to make sure your flight rules is actually IFR.
Even if you are not IFR rated, you're still going to put IFR.
Because the reason why we do this is if you put VFR flight rules in there, it will not give you a discrete transponder code number. The computers don't send it like that. They just think you should be on 1200. So you always want to do the IFR, even though you're going to be VFR, because you need that transponder code before you take off. It's just to kind of bypass the computer a little bit and give you that code. The other thing is, so your departure point is going to be your airport that you're departing from, and your where you're arriving is going to be the gate, the destination, right? So that's going to be the exit gate. So, right, if I was flying from an airport from here and I'm flying out through Fluky, what I would do is put my exit gate. So I put Fluky right in my destination.
Right. Because the CFRA flight plan is just for the CFRA area. Starts and ends at that gate.
Yep. Once you get out of the area.
Right. So you wouldn't put your actual destination because they don't care where you're at after you get out of this. That CFRA.
Exactly. And the other thing is too, you would put direct to that gate. You wouldn't have any waypoints or anything.
Right. Now, also worth noting, if you were to put that in the flight plan direct, they aren't going to be upset with you if you don't fly directly over like a fix or something. As long as you fly within that general area for the gate, in the gate, so Fluky, anywhere in there, you're okay with it.
Yeah.
You don't have to fly over a specific point.
Exactly. Otherwise, there'd be major traffic congestion there. So as long as you're flying out in that area.
And also something worth noting. So this is going to be a separate and distinct flight plan from just a regular VFR flight plan. If you wanted to file a VFR flight plan, you would have to file this CFRA flight plan and then a VFR flight plan on top of that for the search and rescue features. Okay.
And this is on ForeFlight. Yeah. So as you can see, you select VFR DC CFRA. As you can see, flight rules, VFR, DC CFRA. Your departure point would equal your airport, right? So if we were leaving from AMP, put in as a departure, and then our gate would be Woolley, right?
Right. Even if your airport was somewhere outside of the CFRA area, like if you're going to, I don't know, Baltimore.
Mm-hmm.
Oh no, Baltimore is in the CFRA. All right, sorry about that. If you were going back to Princeton, you
Yep.
wouldn't put Princeton as your destination. You would
Yeah.
have to file a separate flight plan that would say you're coming from Woolley as your departure to Princeton. That would just be a regular VFR flight plan.
Mm-hmm. And like just say you can only file from there out of the CFRA. All right. So now when you're flying to an airport in the CFRA, so it's almost the same thing, just in reverse now, right? So when we normally get our flight plan with our code, we call ATC on the ground. And when we leave the airspace, we cancel that flight plan with them on the radio. But now we're entering, we have to open that flight plan as before, about 10 miles before we get to the gate, and then we can close it once we land. So to file this, you want to make sure when you're entering, you're on that ATC squad code and put in your location to the gate. Maintain two-way radios. Don't squawk anything else but your code. And like I said, it's reversed. So your gate would be your departure point, and your destination, I was getting mixed up, and your destination would be the airport, right? So from the gate to the airport, whichever way you're flying. Now, if you're transiting through it, right? So this is if, all right, I'm flying down to Florida. I just got to get through DC airspace. It shortens up my time. You still have to file the flight plan, right? So still in the CFRA flight plan. You would send your transponder code. You remain clear of the flight restriction zone, right? Because you still can't fly right through it, even if you're just on a CFRA flight plan. That does not clear you to fly over that middle circle. And then you file from gate to gate. So if I'm entering from Woolley, I'm entering out of Flunky, I think it was, right? I would put my, oh man, here we go again. I always mix them up. My departure point and then my destination point would be, so if Woolley was my where I'm entering the CFRA, it would be Woolley. If I'm leaving out of Flunky, that'd be my destination. Remember, this flight plan does not give you clearance through any Bravo airspace, though.
Right, because DC is chock full of Bravo and Delta airspaces.
Yes.
That you would need additional clearance.
You still need that Bravo clearance if you're VFR, right? IFR, you won't need it. We'll go with that.
IFR, you just
go. You still can't fly over your flight restriction zone, though.
Right.
But you don't need that Bravo clearance. But if you're VFR, you still need it no matter what.
All right.
So Leesburg, so there's an airport on the edge of the CFRA, as you can see here. Though we want to know, they have a few different squawk codes. So if you're flying out of this airport and you're flying out of the CFRA, you don't need a flight plan, because as long as you're flying right out of the CFRA, you're good, because it is so close to the edge, right? So you must directly exit or enter and fly right to the airport if you're using this area. So in order to leave, you got to squawk 1226 until you get out of the CFRA. Then you can squawk VFR. Coming back in, you have to squawk that 1226 again in order to come into land. And like I said, you can't be flying around, doing circles, maneuvering. You pretty much want to be landing at the airport. Now, there are some exceptions for when you do pattern work and a few other things. So as you can see, arrivals, you still want to contact tower 9 miles out, because you want to let them know what you're doing, because you don't just want to fly in not talking to ATC, right?
Yeah. But now if the tower's closed, you're going to have to file a flight plan.
Yep, to get back in. So if you're doing pattern work, you want to squawk 1234, and
it's easy enough to remember.
Yep, that's an easy code. But if you're exiting and entering, 1226. And you must still remain clear of that Class Bravo airspace, right? So this still does not clear you through that Bravo airspace. And listen to the weather, and check your NOTAMs, right? If there is another TFR around that's not specifically just the DC TFR, right? There could be one moved over. Now, do I need more? Do I need something else to fly into this airspace, right? Always do your research before.
Emergency
procedures. So now we already said how you have to have your two-way communication while you're flying inside of the CFRAs, right? But now what happens if we lose our communications? Now we're not talking to them, and we're in a big space where they want to know what you're doing at all times. So if you lose radio communications when in there, you set your code to your what is it? When you lose your radio,
76.
Yeah, 76. I'm trying to think of the word. When you lose your radios, you always squawk 7600, right? So you just squawk 7600, and you would exit by the most direct route. If your departure point is closer than the other side, you'd return to your departure point and exit out that way.
Right.
Because they don't want you flying further in and having you in the CFR for more time if you already can't talk on the radio. And especially because if you're getting close to that DC area, they may think, even though he's squawking 7600, well, what's going on now? What's this guy's intentions? Anything like that.
Right. Yeah, and if you lose your transponder and your radio, just
Mhm.
run, get out of it.
Yeah. Your ghost
If you're heading out of it, they're going to assume, okay, we don't see a squawk and we don't hear him talking.
He
He's
has
leaving, so
he has some failures, but he knows what to do. He took a course online before this, and he knows what to do.
right. But if you just going to try to cut through it, they're going to be pretty sore.
Yeah, they're gonna want to know what you're doing.
All right. So in the event that they do get sore with you and decide to intercept, you do a unscheduled formation flight.
You find two jets right off your left and right.
Yep. So first step's always going to be remain calm.
Even though you don't know how you got yourself in this situation or anything, right? We want to plan, all right, how are we going to get ourselves out of this? Don't panic. Don't freak out. Don't think about everything else right now. The main thing, they want to get you out of this airspace, make sure you're doing it safely and properly. And they want to talk to you, know what your intentions are. They're not there to fight with you, be mean with you. They're just doing their job and trying to figure out what your main intentions are.
Right. So you'd want to squawk 7700.
At that point, it's a little bit of an emergency. And they will be calling you on guard, so 121.5. So that's why, especially if you're flying through the CFRA, if you have that secondary radio, try to put it on 121.5, because if you're doing something wrong and you don't realize, and let's say you turn the volume down on your comms 1, well, you may hear people try to call you on 121.5. If they don't, and this goes for kind of any emergency or anything, if you're doing something wrong and they can't reach you on a frequency that you're supposed to be on, they'll most likely call you on guard, right? Because most aircraft monitor it. They want to know that.
Yeah, pretty much. Especially if you're in the CFRA area, you really want to monitor. You have it on the comm too.
Want to know what's going on. If any jets are around you, be aware of it.
Yeah. And the same thing goes for just a regular TFR. Anytime you see F-16s next to you,
121.5 is your go-to.
And do what they tell you.
Comply. Never try to say I can't unless it's a big safety of flight issue, but you have to talk about that at that point, right? Just make sure you're doing what they say.
When in doubt, talk it out.
Yep, exactly. Don't be afraid to talk. Visual warning system. So this means you've gotten too close to where you shouldn't be. This is if an aircraft if you're in that flight restriction zone, right, and you have no flight plan, no transponder, you're not responding to ATC, they'll give you visual warnings too. So this way you know, and if you look, this is what they look like, red and green. This means, as you can see, turn away. It's hard to read here, or talk to AC, or talk to ATC. You want to respond with this because, as you can see, if you do not respond, they'll take further measures, which can include flares and launch of intercept aircraft. They use radars too to track you. So even if your transponder isn't working or anything, they most likely still see you because they still have you on radar. That area is heavily covered. So yeah, so give you visual as the last resort.
Okay.
So now that inner circle that we talked about a little bit earlier, right? That flight restriction zone,
all misshapen and it's not as smooth looking at the CFRA.
Yes, it still is part of the CFRA, right? So you still need those flight plans and everything.
Right.
But now we need additional security requirements because of how close this is to the DC area.
Makes sense.
So they want to do extra security backgrounds on everyone, make sure they're all good. So limitations. So aircraft operations are permitted, obviously law enforcement, federal aircraft, all states. You must comply with your waiver of operations if you are going to fly into that As you can see, everyone who flies in there must have a waiver for law enforcement, all of that. So some limitations with it. So you saw what you can do and what waivers you need. Now, this is what you cannot do, right? So you can't do flight training, right? You can't be doing circles around a point around the White House or Pentagon, all those big buildings, right? They don't want you doing that.
Right. VFR is much more limited than the IFR.
Yes. Because VFR, we're a lot more free. IFR, you're flying right to the airport. They know more what you're doing.
Yeah. But if you're trying to fly VFR in that area, just don't.
Yep. That's probably not a good idea unless you really need to get to an airport in that area. Because as you can see, even practice instrument approaches and pattern work isn't allowed in this area.
For the most part.
Also, yeah, we'll talk about some of the airports inside the flight restriction zone, and we'll talk about how you can fly into them.
But for the most part, if you're just trying to do a training flight, like a cross country to a Ronald Reagan airport, a nice VFR cross country, don't.
It's going to be a hassle. It's not even worth it, especially in our session. Unless you have a really good reason to go there, it's probably easier just to stay away.
All right. And there are some exceptions known as the Maryland 3. You've got College Park Airport, Potomac Airfield, and Washington Executive Hyde Field. So
as you can see, all three of these airports are within this inner circle, but there's one thing. It is now the Maryland 2. Is recently updated from the FAA class. They still haven't updated it, but recently an airport was closed.
Right. So that's why you always want to check your charts. The course on the FAA's website was done in, I believe it said January of 2020, and Hyde Field ended up closing in November of 22. So it's always good to check the charts. Remember, they do change. Airports close, airports open. So that's one less airport we got to worry.
Yep, things are a little different. As you can see, to operate them, you must comply with security rules issued by the TSA. You must be approved and vetted and receive your identification number, so your PIN, and file a flight restriction zone flight plan. We'll talk a little bit more about these, but you have to go through more extensive like fingerprinting, background checks before you're allowed to fly in this area.
You also have to call the airport and do like security arrangements.
Yep. Everything. They want to know what you're doing because, like I said, you're close to that airport. So you must call your Washington Air route and file an IFR or flight restriction zone flight plan.
Right. So it's a little bit different than just filing a normal flight. But the SFRA flight plan, you could just call flight service or do a ForeFlight.
You can file it as long as you have the class and that certificate from taking the class.
So ForeFlight will actually not allow you to file a freeze flight plan just because it's so much that goes into filing it. You have to get your clearances. If you try to file it, they will give you a big error warning and say no.
Yep, it won't pop up.
Right.
Right, and obviously you must comply with IFR or VFR egress procedures.
And that's just a clip of the PIN application. It's not that bad, but it's still got to go through the whole procedure of getting checked out, and they really want to just know what you're doing, who you are.
Like I said, more background checks, right? If you're flying in this area, they want to know what you're doing, where you're going. And that's when you get the PIN, right? So you always know if you ever fly back, they know, all right, this is the PIN. This is relates to this person.
Maryland 2.
Yep. So
a freeze flight plan will satisfy the requirements for a SFRA flight plan. So if you were to file for a freeze, then you could go through the actual outer ring of the SFRA. The same is not true. So if you file a SFRA flight plan and you try to fly into the center ring that freeze, no,
you may find those jets next to you.
Yeah, that's not going to be a great day.
Yep. So these are some of the entry procedures, right? So
those are the expected entry points if you were to be landing at College Park or Potomac Airport. Those are the expected radials.
Yep. So if you're flying in, ATC may tell you you're coming in on, they want you coming in this way or that way. They'll advise you what they want you to do, but remember, you always must be talking with them. So some additional, and I'll go back to the bottom. So some additional requirements is if you're ever lost and you want to know what you need, and if you're going to airport, you can actually, if I can click on this link,
Hit play.
where's play? Oh yeah. Ah,
No.
oh, hold up.
All right, everybody, we gotta go.
We're gonna get there.
Just start over.
I think I'm on your side. Oh my gosh. All right. From current slide.
There we go.
Now, so if you go to College Airport website, you can see the vetting procedure that you must do in order to fly into the flight restriction zone. They break it down. So, like we were saying, you must complete that DC CFRA online course, right? So that course to fly into CFRA, the big circle, right? You must have this course done before. So it's not like you can just do this other stuff and skip that course.
Right. And you especially can't say, I saw Joe and Andrew talk about it. I can go. You still have to get the course.
Still have to get the first certificate. Right. You also need to complete that PIN application that we showed you a little bit before. You can fill it out prior to printing it and then print it out. Then what you must do is submit the following documents to the airport, right? So you have to fill out the PIN application, flight training certificate, also your certificate, your medical, and your form of government ID, right? That's how they identify you. After that, you have to contact them. They actually do a brief video call on you. They want to know
if you're insane.
Yeah, what's your intentions of flying here, right? That's pretty much what they want to know.
Right. Just remember, if you're gonna do this, if you're going down this route, try to do it in advance, because it's gonna take at least 48 hours to get a response out of this. But that's at a minimum.
And this isn't a flight you're gonna say, oh, let's just go fly here today. No, this is like more of a planned flight that you need to know, why am I going this way? What are we doing exactly? Third thing is you have to get your fingerprint. So you fill this out online, you're able to get fingerprinted.
And the most important, gotta pay a fee.
Yep, gotta pay a fee. Can't go anywhere without paying a fee. So you gotta pay a fee for that. And then after completing this, they forward it to TSA, and you can see it's 3 to 4 weeks by the time you receive a PIN or the other information.
Yeah. So like we said, plan ahead.
Yep, exactly. But this is a good website if you're ever flying in College Park. They kind of simplify it here, make a list for you. If you're ever lost, you can always take a look here. All right. And
that's all we got.
Stop sharing. All right. I think that's it. Does anyone have any questions or any?
I think that's it.
I have a question.
Ready?
So this is Engin, by the way.
Hey, how you doing, Engin?
Fine, how are you?
You good?
Great.
Been terrible with the weather, though.
Yeah. I couldn't be able to fly 3 consecutive days, so.
Yeah, it's been bad. But what's the question?
So question is, well, let's just say I'm on the Verrazano Bridge. I am northbound on the Hudson River. So which way is the safest way to fly? Should we center the Hudson River or stay on the right side, like traffic? Which way is the best practice?
You want to stay on the right side, just like you would be driving on the road, right? So you don't want to be in the middle, because if we were both in the middle, we could be running into other planes. But now if we're on separate sides, right? I'm passing planes this way. So it's just like kind of how you're driving on the road. So the safest way is if you're going, just stay to the right side. So if you're flying southbound, you're probably going to be closer to Jersey. If you're flying northbound, you're going to be closer to New York.
Yeah, that makes sense. And one follow-up question: what if we end of the Hudson River? So we can go a little bit right to the land, into the land, without passing to the Bravo airspace. So is it possible to do a very large, not steep turn? I mean,
so it does open up at the other end.
Right.
So when you get to the other end, if you look at the sectional, it actually breaks off, and then that's where the like upside down wedding cake from the Bravo, the airspaces will actually increase.
Oh yeah, there's no restriction on that one. Okay, so end of
Because it starts to go up on the other side, just like
it's fine. Yeah.
And we have a couple in the chat as well.
yep.
So we'll start with the squawk code. So for the Hudson, I'm assuming you're talking about. So you just squawk
1200. As long as you're under that, was it 1,300 feet? You have to be under that though.
Yeah. If you're on flight following, squawk what they
You're going to have a code. But for the DC, no matter if you fly in the CFRA, you're going to have a discrete squawk code.
And a gyroplane fly down.
Oh.
That's a good question. I don't see
That's
why
okay.
not.
I'd say they could fly that. I don't. Yeah.
It's no problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't see why not.
Yeah.
I'm not 100% sure on that, but I mean, it's still an aircraft. So
I heard a response there that said good.
okay. But any more questions?
It was Tom. Tom was talking.
Thanks, Tom.
Yeah, no problem.
Tom's been in the Hudson a lot. He's been flying the helicopters over there, so I know he's very well experienced with the Hudson corridor.
Can I give you a bit of a gotcha on the Hudson there? Based on that question, the other person said about being over the how the Hudson widens down at the northern end. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. Can you throw up a picture on Sky Vector of the northern end of the Hudson?
Yeah, 1 sec. I'm doing that if you want to answer other questions real quick.
Oh, while I got the mic here, one of the things I just wanted to mention about the Hudson, don't forget about minimum safe altitudes.
Right.
Just because you're in the exclusion, you're still bound by minimum safe altitudes. It's hard to argue if there's a problem that if you try to claim you're in uncongested airspace, you're next to the citiest city in the world, and you're immediately adjacent to the most populous state in the United States. So to say you're in uncongested airspace is a tough argument. Yeah. All right, so zoom in a little bit on that, and you'll notice that as you get up near the northern end, over on the right-hand side, you're going to have Yankee Stadium. And there are many frequent TFRs over Yankee Stadium, and they extend over and block the northern end of the Hudson River. So you may say to yourself, hey, look, I can just divert a little bit to my left, and I can be at 1,500 feet and still not be in the Class Bravo airspace. Can you see a problem with that?
Could be running into other planes.
Well, how about the Class D airspace of Teterboro Airport?
Oh.
You just penetrated 5 miles from Teterboro, and you're in their Class D.
That's a great point.
That's true.
Okay? So if you try to skirt around the stadium TFR to your, as the picture shows, left, you're in the Class D airspace of Teterboro, and you need to be talking to them.
Yeah, no, I never thought of that.
Now, the other
So that's
thing,
where it goes into important about your pre-flight planning.
yeah, how about that? That's one of the gotchas that get you, and TFRs at Teterboro happen a lot. I'm sorry, at
Yankee Stadium.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I see that pop up all the time.
Mm-hmm.
the minimum
see
safe
what I'm
altitude thing. Remember, it's 1,000 feet over a congested area, and you got to stay 2,000 feet abreast of any obstacle. So it's questionable. You got to stay pretty far away from that statue when you're taking the turn. And if you sneak down even low, you still got to be 500 feet. So keep that in mind when you're trying to maneuver. And you want to stay at the 1,000 feet rather than sinking below the 1,000 feet and thinking that, okay, it's not congested here. It's congested there. The FAA is not going to have a pretty response to you if there's any sort of a problem and you are below 1,000 feet and you try to claim that that's not a congested area. Yeah, the other thing I wanted to say was about around the DC area. Make sure that you're using your panel mounted navigation equipment. There have been any number of situations where people using ForeFlight relied on their iPad's GPS, which is by no means accurate, and got themselves into a lot of trouble, to the point of being, escorted to air bases where they departed 3 days later without their aircraft and without their ratings. So it would be a good idea to make sure that you're using official FAA certified panel mounted navigation equipment or official FAA charts.
That's a great point.
Yeah, because even if you get your IFR rating right, it's still important to memorize that your iPad isn't good to shoot approaches on or do anything like that. You still need those special approved FAA ones.
Right.
So never rely, it's good situational awareness, right? But it's not your primary source. And I think we had make it big. And then the DASIT. Yeah, SSP.
As for Bob with the gyroplane, he does not need a special squawk code.
This one. There we go. I don't know what DASIT. We're looking up real quick. Let's take a look into that. I don't know if
I think we'll have to look into that a little bit more. Nancy.
I don't even know what that is. Or Access Standard Security Program, certain general show as Ronald Reagan Airport. Oh, so I guess you can land at Ronald Reagan Airport, it looks like. I've actually never heard of this before.
Believe it. Don't you have to be a part of a 121 or a 129?
Well, it says general aircraft. We'll have to take a look and get back to you on that one. Because I found it so small. I've actually never heard of that before. So I'll have to take a look at that. But that'd be pretty neat if you could just land at Ronald Reagan.
You can, but there's a lot of paperwork you have to do as well.
I was probably even more than the flight restriction zone.
Yeah, I think it's about a 6-month backup they have to file, not file, but the paperwork that the FAA has to look on your background and all that stuff.
Yeah, because I know they have, because even with the private jets, sometimes they have to have security guards like on board, standing there with them.
That's more 121, I think, but for us, it's different, but they still want to have your fingerprints and all that other paperwork as well as this DAS
background.
Yeah.
And if it's anything like LaGuardia and Kennedy, bring money.
Of course. Just like paying the tolls at the George Washington Bridge.
Oh, man. They always got that. Even the fingerprints cost them money.
There's no free lunch.
Why do planes fly? Because of money.
All right. Do we have any other
questions?
Yeah, I have another question about regarding the Tom explanation. We are using the ForeFlight and ForeFlight using the GPS, the embedded GPS of the device. What if we are using this little ADSP devices like Sentry? Is it the ForeFlight using the ADSP data for our location or?
So that's what Tom is talking about. That part isn't acceptable for like if it says, oh, this says I'm outside the airspace. It has to be the FAA approved. Because remember, let's say if you fly into this airspace or anything, and then you get caught, and you say, oh, but my ForeFlight says this.
That's not acceptable.
But then let's say if your FAA approved mounted GPS was in there, and that said you were out of it. Well, then you may have something to stand on a little bit too, because this is the FAA certified this. The GPS and iPads it's supplementary. You can use it for great situational awareness, but it cannot be your main primary source of navigation.
Yeah, my question is what if we attach the devices like ADSP in devices like Sentry, little white ones?
Right.
Still not it.
It's still
doesn't
not
count.
100% acceptable for your sole and primary source of navigation. You still need that panel mounted GPS.
Okay.
It does help with the signal a little bit. It helps.
It helps, like I said, it's more for situational awareness, and that is not acceptable for your main source.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Any more?
Yeah, when it actually ends up being that if you're using your ForeFlight and you have the back image on the ForeFlight as the actual FAA official chart, if your GPS fails in your aircraft, you can use the background image of your ForeFlight, that's the official FAA chart, as your primary means of navigation. However, you must ignore the little aircraft because the aircraft is placed by your iPad or your Sentry.
That's true, because not. GPS mounted with older, does that count? And so the FAA has two certain GPSs that they approve. They're like TSO. I'd have to look into regulations. I don't believe that counts. I'd have to double check it.
It doesn't.
But it doesn't count?
No.
So then, yeah, it doesn't, because
that is a handheld GPS that happens to be attached to the dash. It is not a certified GPS.
So it's almost like a car GPS in a plane, with a little bit more. But yeah, the FAA does only approve certain types of GPS. So if you can look it up. I forget the code. It's like TSO something, but you can read it up more if you look it up. But I forget exactly. All right. I don't think, right? I think that's everything. All right, and we'll hand it back on over to Gabby.
All yours, Gabby.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Joe. Also, thank you, Tom, for some extra information there at the end.
And thank you all for coming out tonight, too.
Yes, if anyone has any ideas for the future in terms of a webinar, let us know. This one was really something to come back to. Even myself, I've flown the Hudson several times, and it's always great to come back and be even more aware of the situation. So thank you, and hopefully the weather will get better, and we'll see you all soon flying.
All right, take care, everybody. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
You're welcome. Have a good night.